You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we begin our conversation about comfort watches, comfort TV shows, comfort movies that just make me feel good. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau, and the impetus for this episode, Pete, you are sociable on the social medias. You kind of do what I do when, especially late at night, when it gets to around like 10:30 p.m. in my neck of the woods. I start tossing in a movie 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.9 times out of 10. It's a movie that makes me feel good. It's a comfort watch. It's something that I'm nostalgic for. But most of the time, it's a movie that I grew up watching, that I've revisited many times. For whatever reason, that evening, that's the warm blanket that I want to put on myself to watch right before I go to bed. You've kind of done the same thing, and you've shared some comfort watches. And I think that's the good motivation for this episode, because I think we might share some comfort watch experiences in some of the movies.
I have a feeling that we might. I'm also guessing that a lot of your comfort watches might boil down to going through the entire Kolchak The Nightstalker series.
You wouldn't be wrong. Yes.
He covers the cases others dare not touch.
A headless motorcycle rider swinging the sword. I believe you.
And he will get his story at any cost.
Why should we always accentuate the gruesome?
Was Morton by any chance beheaded?
Yes, and you could use a good trim yourself.
He's not your average reporter.
Another vanishing corpse! I tell you, we're in luck!
And these are not your run-of-the-mill cases.
This is one story I may not get to file in person because it's after me.
He is the Nightstalker.
Nightstalker, Night Strangler. Some of those episodes are just fun to watch because they just have that oozing 70s vibe. Mm-hmm. You can't replicate it. And yes, many a nights in my comfort TV show movie watching.
Yeah, and I think I know for myself, when you brought up the idea of like, let's talk comfort movies, and I'm in very much a comfort zone right now for a couple of different reasons. What I immediately go back to, listeners, you're going to find a very distinct era of movies that I'm going to discuss. And I think there, like you said, I think there's going to be a bit of an overlap with some of the things that you find as your comfort watches. So let's have some fun. Let's get into it. Let's throw a warm blanket over ourselves and take ourselves back to our childhood when there were no cares or worries in the world. And, gas prices were, well, there was a gas shortage in my youth, but I was too young to remember that, so it doesn't really matter.
Saturday afternoon at a certain age, like not too old, when video games, girls, hanging out with my buddies was a thing, mm-hmm. but also not too young where playing with toys wasn't the majority of my life. It was like somewhere in between where I could grab a comic book that I got at like 7-Eleven, Zayre, Venture, Woolworth.
She's been kidnapped by Cobra. We have no alternative. Call in G.I. Joe.
Fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. He never gives up. He'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe.
Who's leader of the Joe team? Buck.
It's America's best. He's in control. He's a man.
Good luck, Joe.
He lives his days. The legend of G.I. Joe.
The Legend of G.I. Joe. New from Marvel Comics.
Watching that on a Saturday afternoon, having just consumed way too much sugar from cereals and watch Saturday morning cartoons. And now maybe it's after wrestling. Next thing you know, here's this movie that starts like right around lunchtime. High adventure, pulp, sci-fi, sometimes fantasy for sure, martial arts. Like those are the kind of movies I'm thinking. Is that about jive with what you're thinking?
Yeah, the Venn diagram, there's definitely some overlap happening here. I would go one further from my personal experiences. That a lot of these were certainly Saturday afternoon watches for me, but a few of them would kind of show up midweek. I have a feeling a lot of yours were probably broadcast on WGN. We've talked about, that was your kind of, Chicago-bound staple local TV show. I had WPIX 11 in New York. I also had WOR Channel 9. WABC Channel 7 would have, during the week, they would have, it would be like Monster Week or Planet of the Apes Week.
My God,
all this week.
It's a city of apes.
It's City's Planet of the Apes week.
It's a bloody nightmare.
The only good human is a dead human.
Out of the trees and into your living room.
That could be dangerous.
The Week of the Apes.
Even fatal.
On Great Movies, starting tonight. And now, City TV presents Planet of the Apes, starring Charlton Heston and Roddy McDowall.
And so like each day at around 4, they would show one of these movies and I would lose my mind coming home from school, having my snack, watching some Super Friends, and then waiting for 4 o'clock to hit so I could watch the entire Planet of the Apes series, even though at the time I still knew enough to be like, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, not really a very good film. But this is where the Saturday afternoons and these weekday movies that were on local New York television, that's where it hit for me. And yeah, like you, like a lot of fantasy, not so much horror, but yeah, more just high adventure fantasy. I think a couple of these movies have a lot of similarities as I was thinking about my what made my short list for this discussion. So just something about them. I think it brings me back to a period of my life where coming off the influence of going to see Star Wars in the drive-in and coming of an age where your imagination just gets fired up from the love of all these movies. And by no means are all the movies that we're going to discuss today would be considered classics, but I think that they all have some kind of charm, and maybe the charm was when they were produced. Maybe the charm was just an amalgamation of practical effects and some cheesy effects. But again, when you're a kid and you're a child growing up in the 70s and the 80s, I have a feeling that we were a little more forgiving back then with some of these effects because we didn't really know. We were still coming out of the age of you can see the strings on the spaceship, like we weren't far removed from 2001 and then Star Wars, where it just seemed to take this, no pun intended, light year leap in advance of special effects technology. So we got some of that. We were on the cutting edge of that stuff, but we were still deeply embedded in those 50s and 60s kind of cheesy pulp, sci-fi movies where, yes, you watch them today and it looks hokey, but when you're a kid, especially, you just go along with it. If the story's good, you're invested in the story. And I think our comfort watches are certainly going to fall heavily into that category of fun watches.
For sure. I think there's another factor that I'm interested to see if you would agree with. I think a lot of these movies that made my list, and I have a guess, made yours, also tend to not be what I think people would always imagine to be like big budget movies. Tron, Indiana Jones, you mentioned Star Wars. Like these are movies that, yes, just like you said, inspired my imagination, had you run out into the woods to be Han Solo, something that Metal Storm, the Destruction of Jared did not have you do. But I think a lot of these movies, especially as I was grabbing them off my shelf, I started realizing that they weren't necessarily low budget fare, but they were certainly not big budget movies, but they were somewhere that in between where they still had, I think you said it best, a sense of charm. And maybe it's because some of the directors, some of the creators, the special effects people that were involved in these movies, I think that's where, again, folks are going to hear the Venn diagram. It's like, oh, that name again. It's like, yes, there's something about those movies that had a charm and aesthetic that made them perfect for that Saturday afternoon type movie.
Mm-hmm. So, I kind of talked a little bit about what constituted a comfort movie to me. Like this was like if you were homesick, afternoon movie, or like those Saturday mornings, those lazy Saturdays where maybe it's raining out, or you got, in my case, I got like the lucky sunny afternoon where my mom wasn't yelling at me to go out at a house and do something outside.
And to be fair, Sundays were always reserved for Samurai Sunday. Let's just be...
Saturday and Sunday is like night and day in terms of like what you'd be watching on TV.
Welcome to Super 66 Samurai Sunday.
So those type of things constituted comfort movies for me. And there's stuff that I go back to on a fairly regular basis today. I can't watch them all the time, but usually like once a year, we'll come back around and something will just hit me. I'll just share right now. I lost my mom very recently. And so I'm kind of in that mode of wanting that warm comfort blanket of just wanting to be wrapped around in something that seems familiar. And I think that's what kicked off this latest round of comfort watches for me. But I'm curious for you, like what would you yes, these movies that you're going to talk about are comfort watches, but what kind of draws you into those becoming comfort watches for you?
Well, there's something reassuring about these films. And I imagine when people talk about procedurals, NCIS, CSIs, the Law and Order type shows, and I've never been attracted to those shows, but I can see the appeal because, and now plot point 3 is going to happen. Why? Well, the third commercial break kicked in, and this is the part where this is going to happen, and they're going to find a killer, and there's going to be the red herring. I think it's the same reason why people love Hallmark movies and those Lifetime films that, kind of get derided, especially during the holidays, for being cheesy or cheap, paint by numbers. When you mentioned losing your mother, not in the same vein, but certainly during lockdown, I was, speaking for myself.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was a time when, a lot of people went to those comfort watches, not feeling like you're in control, just turning on the news, just washing your groceries at a time when we're washing our groceries. Like, what do you do? So what do? You pop in some of these movies. That's what I did, revisited some TV shows that just made me more nostalgic for a different time, a safer time.
A more familiar time, yeah.
100%, yeah. And I think just a time when, I think with a lot of this stuff, like the Saturday morning cartoons we watch, your love for Land of the Lost, the Planet of the Apes TV show, or Knight Rider, that's that warm blanket that I think we've both been seeking at different times in our life.
Yeah, and I think there's another word to throw in there is escapism, right? They're like escapism from whatever you've got going on in your life. And yeah, the pandemic was, such a strange time for all of us. I think it was quite healthy for those of us that kind of just fell back into watching those comfort movies because, again, that's something that you could hold on to. There's a control there of like, I don't know what the hell's going on outside, my door right now, but I know that I can just sit and watch whatever it is, Dirty Dancing, Knight Rider, whatever it might be. That's 30 minutes, that's an hour, that's 2 hours where things at least make some semblance of sense. And so totally get it. Yeah, psychiatrists have a field day with all of that stuff, but it's very real. And there's a very real reason why we all, or not all, but many of us kind of gravitated towards that. So here's another question I've got for you, because this might just be unique to me right now, but I've been finding lately that it's been a struggle for me to find stuff that I want to watch. And, I don't know if at this point, like our choices are, if not endless, seemingly endless between all those streaming services that we can subscribe or not subscribe to. And whether it's Tubi, Prime, Netflix, Max, whatever the case may be, there's just so much content out there. I don't know. I think it's just a phase that I'm going through, but I find myself scrolling through so much of this stuff, and it's not that I don't want to watch some of these things. There's some of them that I'm very interested in, but I just haven't been in the mood to watch certain things. And it's been interesting how those comfort movies are just kind of like, nudging me off in the corner and be like, hey, over here. And, I turn and be like, yeah, that feels right. I'm going to watch this instead. So I don't know if you're going through anything similar, but I've noticed it recently where I'm doing a lot of scrolling past stuff on the streaming services, and it's just nothing is grabbing me in the way where I'm like, yes, I've got to watch this right now.
I had that. I don't have it now, and I feel like if you're contagious, keep it to yourself, Pete. I don't want it. But I do remember at one point, I actively remembered that I was spending more time searching for a movie on Netflix, Hulu, or Disney Plus than I was watching it. And it always felt like, did I really just spend 30 minutes looking for something to watch when I've watched that whole row? I know I've seen all of these movies, and I know I've enjoyed all those movies. Why didn't I just click on one of those? Well, those movies just weren't scratching that itch like you talked about. It just wasn't doing it for me. So what I found that I do now, if I just stumble onto a movie, I will save the thumbnail of the poster. And that way in my phone, I can just go to my album and just be like, oh, here are like 6 movies that I wanted to watch. So I could maybe spend some of that time watching the movie and enjoying the movie instead of searching for it. It's taken a little bit of that analysis paralysis away, because I do think that, so that has, all right, so organizing the films that way has helped me. But I'm going to take your question, and I got another question for you, Pete. So for cheesy horror movies, everything from like, William Castle stuff to like 80s slashers, the delivery method for me has been horror host, and predominantly Svengoolie.
This week on Svengoolie,
my guests are dying to meet you.
Everybody's dying to meet Dracula's daughter.
2 little punctures near the jugular vein.
On the next Svengoolie.
Well, there's nothing funny about it.
Saturday at 8, 7 Central on MeTV.
Watching a lot of those movies as I was growing up, when Rich Coase is the son of Svengoolie, as he became more of the national brand that is Svengoolie now, and how they do that every Saturday night still. There's something about having Svengoolie there that is also a warm blanket. He was the delivery method for a lot of those movies. Saturday afternoons in my neck of the woods, and you mentioned, had WGN, they had a show called Family Classics.
This is WGN Television, Chicago.
Good afternoon. I'm Fraser Thomas, here again to welcome you and act as your host for another Sunday presentation of Family Classics. The year is 1865, the last bitter days of the Great Civil War. In a huge observation balloon, some soldiers and a war correspondent are about to make a daring escape from a Confederate prison. But the weird adventures which await them at the end of their stormy flight are straight from the pages of science fiction and Jules Verne's absorbing tale of a mysterious island. So now, if you're quite ready, let us begin.
What I was watching was hosted by Roy Leonard, and he had a large leather-bound book, and he would open it up, and it would just be like the seamless transition into the book to the title screen. Movies like Adventures of Robinson Crusoe or Captain Blood, Dumbo, Jungle Book, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, stuff like that. That was like the delivery method for a lot of these movies that I'm going to bring up. I'm wondering if Pix or any of the channels in your neck of the woods or on Long Island actually had something like that.
Yeah, it's funny. To answer your question, New York really didn't have that. Like the tri-state area, we did not have like the host type person. The closest thing I can remember, and at this point it was a little bit later on and it was less the comfort movie watches, and this was more national, but I remember my brother and I watching like Commander USA's Groovy Movies, throw in some snippets, and there would always be like that comedy sketch.
Wherever there is a wrong to be righted, he is there. Wherever humanity gropes for that universal meaning of life, he is there. He is everywhere, for he is Commander USA. Far below a teeming shopping mall, Commander USA enters his video vault to bring you action, adventure, and zany non-stop thrills in Commander USA's Groovy Movie. Today's Groovy Movie, Mako, Jaws of Death. And now, Commander USA!
Oh, hey there! Commander USA here, soaring super unleaded superhero. Legion of Decency, retired. Oh, man, I'm glad you showed up today, boy. Yeah, because I'm feeling good. Yeah, fit as a fiddle.
But for what I grew up watching, ABC 7, it was like the 4 o'clock movie. And I distinctly remember like the graphic of, it was like this weird, kind of like this like percussion beat. And it was like this weird animation graphic of, it was almost like layers of like a person behind a camera, like cranking the camera and, like
get the excitement going, right?
Yeah, it was like the 4 o'clock movie. But my gateway because there was no like host like that, was essentially what I would do was every Sunday we would get, people grew up of our generation and older grew up with TV Guide and things like that. And so our local paper, Newsday, had its own like TV Guide it was printed on newsprint. And what I would do every Sunday was I would start pouring through this thing. I'd immediately go to Saturday and I'd start going from like 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. And I would look to see the listings to see, is there a Godzilla movie coming up? Is there Mysterious Island or Journey to the Center of the Earth? I'm giving away a couple of my picks here. I would see if those were coming up, and then, then I would start salivating and be like waiting until Saturday to be like, ooh. And then the game would be like, I hope it's going to rain on Saturday, because otherwise my mom and her famous saying, it's in for you to be inside right now when it's sunny out. And I say that as someone, along with my brother, that we were outside a lot. Like we were playing in the woods. We were doing all that shit all the time. It wasn't like we were sitting in the house watching TV all day. And I guess I credit my parents for that, because they kind of instilled, they would not allow us to remain inside. But I feel like we built up enough of that goodwill of like, hey, played Star Wars in the woods for 3 hours the other day. I think I'm good to watch, Curse of Frankenstein for an hour and a half on sunny Saturday here. And, and I'm Gen X. So like my parents are like, go off, do whatever the fuck you want. Just be home by 6 for dinner. And that's what we did. There are times when my brother were like rolling in at like 5:55 and like, yeah, we're here.
We'll find a dead body on the tracks. I feel like the movie Stand By Me, Pete, was about you.
No dead bodies. We did almost burn down the woods that was surrounding our junior high school one day. Actually, I was one of the people that put it out, because I was goody two shoes. I didn't start the fire.
Leave that for another episode, Pete. We got to get back to comfort watches. If not, we'll start getting that hate mail.
We've been talking around this. Kick us off, Bernie.
I'm going to kick us off by not covering any of the movies on my list just yet, but going through a lot of the movies that would be on my list, a number of the movies that I found that aired on WGN that I certainly watched, Pete. And I think I'm going to see your head bob a lot on this one. Captain Blood, Absent-Minded Professor, War of the Worlds, Forbidden Planet, Fantastic Voyage, Atlantis, The Lost Continent, the George Pal version, Incredible Mr. Limpet, and all the Muppet movies. All aired Saturday afternoons on Family Classics. I mean, you give me a Muppet movie, I'm not going anywhere. You give me like Captain Blood, Errol Flynn, was it Captain Courageous or Skyhawk or whatever was those? Like, those were kind of fun pirate type movies. Mm-hmm. And then you would get something like a movie that you're a huge fan of, Ice Pirates.
Now, Sunday at 6, it's a galactic adventure with the Raiders of Outer Space.
Relax, be cool, and whatever you do, don't panic.
In the far-out future, water's more precious than gold, and the ice pirates discover more than their share of treasures.
It's all yours, laddies.
Robert Urich, Mary Crosby, and Angelica Houston fight the ultimate space wars. Ice Pirates, Sunday at 6 on Channel 5.
These types of movies, but as we narrow down the funnel here, folks, to the movies that we are throwing out there, there is one man.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bernie, we're out of time. You're going to have to wait until next week.
That's right. You'll hear part 2 of our conversations about movies that are comfort watches.